What's going on, man? Welcome to the Dad Edge, my friend.
Larry, it's great to be here with you. Appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, man. I'm seeing like look at this background you got going on here. Like these are all the guests you've had on the Radcast, correct?
That's right, man. Blessed to have some of the who's who in business and
Yeah.
celebrities and otherwise.
I love it, man. Well, you know what? You know what I think would be actually kind of cool to start off this podcast is I would love to just maybe go back and forth on a couple things. Like you've had some high level guests, I've had some high level guests. I would love for you to just reflect on maybe one or two guests and something that they said you're like, "Oh my God. Like that was gold. Like that's something I haven't heard or maybe I've been reminded of, whatever it is." But looking back on all your guests, like who is somebody in particular that when you heard them say something, it was just like the world stopped for a moment?
Man, I could probably name a bunch, but ironically, because it was the first thing that came to my mind when you said it, I'm going to have to reach over my shoulder if anybody's watching the video right behind me. Grant Cardone. If you've heard of Grant, he was
Sure.
on Undercover Billionaire, and I mean, he's been on a lot of shows. He's one of the, if you're in that circle, you know who he is. If you don't, go look him up. Super successful in real estate. And he said something to me that it seems like kind of one of those cliche things, but it's not. So, Grant gets asked to do a lot of things, go a lot of places, be a lot of people, shake hands, kiss the babies, do all those kind of things. And he said, Ryan, he said, I get asked to do a lot of things I don't want to do. He said, but I make a commitment that I'm going to show up and I'm going to do it. And he put a little more sauce on it than that. But what he was trying to say is we as human beings, as dads, as fathers, as people, as business owners, we got to do a lot of things that we don't always want to do or that we may not be in the mood to do. But no matter what, the key is to showing up and putting it all in.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no matter what, he said, if you'll do that, that's 80% of it. Show up and do it. He said, we make a lot of excuses today. And, it was one of his, I asked him for 3 keys to success. And that was the first thing he said. He said, just show up, baby. And I think it could resonate with this audience because we've got fathers, we've got business owners, we've got a lot of people. And we all get asked and we get tasked with things that aren't always what exactly we want to do, but we need to show up and be there.
Yeah, 100%. I know we're going to dive deep into that because your story in particular, running 5 companies, having 4 boys, which by the way, we're a rare breed, my friend. Not many dudes out there can be like, I have 4 boys, maybe you'll appreciate this. I get asked a lot like, man, what's it like raising 4 boys? And I've been saying the same things, just a joke, for like years, which is just imagine a fraternity house where everybody's drunk, nobody wants to sleep, and you never get to leave. That's pretty much my house, right? But I embrace the energy. I love the energy. It's a lot of energy, as you know. But that's gold, man, is showing up. And you really alluded to it there in the beginning, which is showing up well, right? Not just showing up and being a spectator, but showing up and doing it well, doing it intentionally. Because I think our kids, right, and our wives, people in general, even our teams in our business, they know when we're just simply showing up to check the box, and they know when our feet are planted in the ground in front of them. So I love that, man. What's another guest that you've had in the past that sticks out?
It's funny. The UFC's really taken off. I'll go to the right and the left of my head here. He surprised me is why I'll bring him up. And it's the voice of the Octagon, Bruce Buffer. That dude, let me just tell you, a ball of energy. He's running like, I thought I had side hustles. This guy's got side hustles on side hustles. He's like, he's got a liquor brand. He's got an energy drink brand. His whole catchphrase is, it's time. Yeah. And by the way, if you go listen to that episode, he does a custom version that was my intro for the Radcast for a while. It's time for the Radcast with Ryan. It's great. And
oh my God, dude.
So go listen to it, if nothing else, just to hear that. And shoot me a DM or something. Tell me how wonderful it was. But no, the dude is super smart in business, and he understands how leverage works and how his persona and what he does on UFC, which when he first started, he got paid nothing. I mean, it was like a couple $1,000s. He's like flying himself to like the first UFC events, getting paid like a couple grand, probably barely even covering the travel costs. But he saw how big that sport was going to be. And he also saw the leverage that it created for himself to do other things by the magnification that was going to happen with that sport. And it's a huge tip. It's really how I resonate with me because that's what I believe. I believe in building leverage and building. You start with one thing that creates a halo for others. And he's done that with lots of ventures. So super insightful. Interesting just because, look, he's a voice. He's a celebrity on some levels if you're into that, and a personality, but just super insightful and understanding how business and attention works.
That is so cool, man. I've always been keen. I've had a ton of UFC fighters on this podcast, and one is, I've always liked Bruce Buffer. In fact, when we run our live events, we run the Dad Edge Summit. We do really fun stuff, like just joking around. Like we do like a push-up contest. We even have like a championship belt for the guys who come back the next year and they're still wearing, they're the reigning champion. And every time we do it, we're like, it's time. Like, I just love that guy's voice. That's so cool. It's interesting. I had Matthew McConaughey on the podcast, and since we're talking about people and names and something, I interviewed him like 3 years ago in 2021, but there's something that I remember about his podcast that I thought was really, really gleaming and really, really cool. And that is, when it comes to marriage, when it comes to fatherhood, we all put our pants on the same way. And no matter what it is that we're doing in our life, whether it's parenting, work, health, marriage, our business, or whatever, there's always going to be something in there that just slips just a little bit depending on what we're focused on. We can't, you and I were talking back and forth before we got started today. The balance thing is a myth, right? There are going to be seasons in our life that our marriage is going to require more of us than our business. There's going to be seasons in our life that our business might require more of us than our marriage. And all those things kind of get jumbled up a little bit. But when I was talking to Matthew, Matthew can be anybody he wants and everybody will believe him, right? He can say anything he wants, people will believe him. So when I asked him about several different things, like his acting career and being a father and all these other things, and I asked him, I was like, hey, how do you keep your marriage on point with Camilla? Like, how do you keep that? Because it looks like you guys are always in the same direction. Things are good. And he said something to me that I thought was incredibly humble, right? For all of us to be reminded. And he took a deep breath and he's like, man, I'll be really honest. That's an opportunity right now for me. He's like, I'm in a season right now where the kids are super busy. I'm filming right now. There's a lot of things that have my attention. And quite frankly, even as you ask me that, I'm reminded that I haven't given her the proper attention. So being that as it may, I'm going to schedule a date night based on you reminding me why that relationship is important. And that taught me a couple of things. Number one, no matter how busy we are, our marriage is going to need our attention, right? Even if it's a little bit. But number two, no matter who we are and how high we're operating, right? It's not all sunshine and rainbows over there. And we have the opportunity to be humble. And if I look at comments and emails that I got after that podcast, it was that part of the show where he was 100% authentic, 100% real. And that makes us like him even more, about that. So, but thanks for sharing that, man. That was a very solid reminder. So let's just dive right in. So before we get to your 4 boys, and I know you have a blended family, and before we get to your 5 businesses, what was growing up like for you? I'm curious, what was the relationship with your own dad like growing up?
I had a great relationship with my dad. I think it's probably a classic 80s, 90s dad relationship. What do I mean by that?
Yeah, what do you mean by that? I'm dying now.
I think it's like the traditional dad relationship. Like, my dad was there. He was an entrepreneur. He owned several companies. He tried to teach me from a level of, I'm a father. And look, my parents started young. My mom was 19 when she had my sister. So my mom and dad were married at age 19. They got married when my mom got pregnant. And, they were dating and probably headed that way anyway. So it wasn't too much a run to the altar, but it was certainly accelerated. And my dad was in the military. And so he was in the Air Force. And so what I mean by that is there's probably a lot of military families and traditional like father-son relationships. And I think I had like my dad was not a drill sergeant. So I want to make that clear. But he had fundamental beliefs and was brought up by a traditional family in that you have the parent relationship, the kid relationship, and I guess we'll transition to kind of my relationships with my kids, where I think it's more modern, where maybe you have those roles, but maybe you try to be a little more vulnerable and more on the plane. I try to be on the plane with my kids, where my dad kind of always stated that father-son relationship. I have these things to share with you. You're my son, and you will learn them. And I respected my dad, but I had a fear of my dad. Because big guy. I'm now 6'5", 260. I'm a big dude. My dad's a big dude. He was in the military, and so there was always a little bit of that fear factor of my dad was authoritative on a lot of levels, but not, he wasn't beating me in the corner like over every spilled milk. But it was sort of I just think it was just that traditional father. I think the classic 20, 30 years ago, there was a little bit of that fear factor between parents and kids.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Dude, are you kidding me? Like right now, yeah, I mean, so I think that's one thing that's really fascinating, if I could kind of comment on what you just said, because here's what I find about this generation of kids, right? So, in our house, I would say it's a really good balance of love, but yet also you really know the boundaries and you know the structure, right? Yeah. And if you deviate from those, then there's gonna be consequences, right? Like for instance, my boys, even though one is almost 18, he's going to be 18 in a couple months. My other one is 16. They both have phones. Both of them have an hour of screen time on that phone. And then all those apps shut down, right? I don't know any of their other friends most of their friends are like, Dad, so-and-so's got, he spends like 8 hours on Snapchat. I was like, well, you know what? We don't do that here. We're just not doing that, right? Yeah. So I think that there needs to be some structure in there. There needs to be respect. There needs to be discipline, right? And I think the way you and I grew up, because I was also a child of the 80s and 90s, right? And that there was that tough love. There was like very fine lines. And dude, I remember growing up and I'm like, oh my God, like I don't want to see my dad. And mostly it was my grandfather who was around. I don't want to see that guy angry, right? Yeah. Because but it also kept me in line. They didn't keep me so fearful that I didn't want to have anything to do with them. It was a respect thing, right? And I think right now, this generation, so for instance, my two boys who are in high school, they came home about a month or two ago. This was right before Christmas. And they were talking about how this dude took a swing at the principal. And the principal of my kid's high school is an ex-drill sergeant. And this principal dodged, grabbed him just to restrain him. The kid kept fighting him. And then the principal ended up having to take him down and just hold him, right? Yeah. And I'm sitting here thinking, and I asked my kids, I was like, what were people doing around him? They were like, they were filming and laughing. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Filming it. So I say that because it's like this generation, they look at it, I think, as entertainment. Like when adults get pissed and fiery. And when you and I were growing up, it's like, oh my God, I don't want to see this. And I think that might have a lot to do with the stuff that they see. They see the Karens on video all day long and they laugh about it. It desensitizes them. And I think it reduces maybe that fear and respect factor a little bit.
100%. And I had enough love at home, but it teetered towards the respect side and the discipline side.
Yeah.
And the teaching you right from wrong versus maybe loving your way through it. I think we've ventured too far into loving our way through everything a bit. And I mean, I'll even say this, my parents spanked us as children.
Yeah.
I will say this, my sister and I were both pretty damn good kids. And I think I got spanked my entire life, 4 times. That's all it took.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no matter how you feel, I don't know how, and look, we haven't had to, I don't know if it was just the threat of it, but I think I've popped one of my kids one time ever on the leg, and that like to stop or something, and not, it was not capital punishment or anything. But the fear of that seemed to resonate, and we haven't had to put that fear in them. And I kind of have probably gone with the times that I feel like you can get your discipline across without the physical side of it. But at the same time, there was growing up for me, that fear and that thought of disappointing them, letting them down, and them being upset mattered to me. And so I grew up with that. But I also had a very caring, and look, my parents came to every game. They took me to every practice. They were there for me. My dad was always around when I needed him.
Mm-hmm.
But it was definitely probably a more fundamental, like you mentioned, structured environment for the typical, father, son, children relationship as I grew up.
I think that's really important. And I do agree with you that I think to some degree we've let the compassion love aspect, and I frame that as it's still a positive thing, but I think we can take that and run with it a little too far to where, at times, look, there's tough love that's needed. It's interesting that you're talking about this very thing. So like my oldest son is a wrestler, and the cool thing about the reason he does it is, my younger son is 16. He's a football player. He's been in football since he was in 3rd grade. And he's like, his attitude is wins, losses, and I'm going to be a savage to go out and win at all costs. Right. I think some people doing sports, some young people are wired to do that. And quite frankly, some just aren't. My oldest son does want to win. Right. But he also doesn't take his losses to extreme of like, well, I just suck and I'm just going to give up. He doesn't do that at all. He does it because he wants to learn mental and emotional resilience. He wants to be physically active. He wants to learn some self-defense. So it's like he's out there to grow physically, mentally, and emotionally, right? That's his shtick, wins or losses. But there are times, obviously, when I see him wrestle, that I see that switch get turned on and he's a savage. And then there are times where I see that he's sabotaging and he's letting, the dark thoughts get in there before he gets out on the mat, and then he enters the mat and you can just tell from the energy, he's not in it. So there are times where like, you want to love, you want a compassion, right? But there are also times where, and I've been doing this lately, I'm like, hey, permission to speak very directly to you of what I'm seeing. And he's like, and sometimes he'll be like, and if it's right after a match, he's like, can you give me a minute to cool down? Can you give me a minute? Cause I'm in a bad mental headspace right now and I won't receive it the way you want. And I'll give him that, of course. But then there are times I'm like, look, and he's like, yeah, I'm ready for it. I'm like, okay, here's the thing. I'm gonna be very direct with you. You're out there and you're defeated before you even hit the mat. I see it in your eyes. I see it in your body language. And the guy you're going up against, it's blood in the water. He senses it too. I was like, what would it look like if you didn't really worry about the outcome? You didn't worry about this guy who's standing across from you and this guy's going to annihilate me. What if it was, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to score as many points as I can, period. Because if you're scoring the points, you're going to get closer and closer and closer to that win, whether you pin him or not, because the guy at the end of the match who has the most points is the one who's going to win. So don't worry about this guy, slaughtering you. Don't worry about this guy beating you. Don't worry about this guy pinning you. Worry about how you're going to get that next point, right? Or those next 2 points, whatever it is. And that is what we're after. And you can just tell like, okay, cool. But I'm very blunt, like very direct with him. And I think sometimes, your kids need it versus like, oh, you did great. Don't worry about it. You'll get him the next time. No, I don't think that's the best way to sometimes.
No. And that's the approach. I think the flip for me with my kids is I think I've gotten more relatable and more, again, I think with my own father, it was very clear the top and the bottom, the structure of father son. I've tried, I think, to take a lesson from that to be, it's very clear. I mean, I'm the authority, but to try to be a little bit more relatable because I didn't always feel relatable with my father. And I've tried to take that into, how I raise my kids is they can respect me and I can hold their respect and hold structure while also trying to be more relatable and more, I don't know, modern on some level to hopefully have a deeper relationship.
I think you nailed it, because if you think about it, if we can combine those two things, if we can be relatable, but we can also be structured, and we can provide also consequences and discipline, but yet relatable, that gives us more credibility.
Yeah.
Because if our kids can relate to us more when we're talking and when we're trying to guide them through something, they're going to give us way more credibility, and they're probably going to listen a whole lot more closely if they know, like, well, at least I know dad understands me, right? Like, he understands that. I mean, I wrestled in high school. I got my ass kicked sometimes. And I think it's really, it's important to also realize, yeah, man, like, I know it sucks to get your butt kicked, like it. And sometimes, like, when you go out there, that switch is not flipped. And we know how defeating that feels. Right. So I love that you brought that up. You know, you are part of, you and I were talking before we hit record today. You're a part of a blended family. You know, you guys got married with 2 2-year-olds and a 4-year-old. And so you had 3 boys in the mix right out of the gate. You got the his, you got the hers, and the ours. But from a blended family approach, we have a lot of men out there that are either going through a divorce process, they're moving on to a different relationship, or maybe they've been married for quite some time in a blended family. But over the past 10 years, what I've noticed is that can be a really difficult dynamic. You know, we see a lot of questions come out of our community around, you know, hey, like, how do I talk to her kid, like, and be disciplinary, or do I treat my kids a little different? And then there's the ours, like, we have this one kid together, and do I go about that differently? There's a lot of moving parts, and it's really dynamic. But for you, what are some things that you and your wife agree upon as a blended family of roles, or how you go about this parenting thing together?
Yeah. And I want to start by saying this, Larry, because I think it could resonate with people that might be going through it, considering it. Our kids are a lot more aware of our own happiness than we realize, and our own what's going on around us. And I made a decision. I was very unhappy in my first marriage. I made a lot of mistakes. I'll come out and say, you know, I married the wrong person, you know, and not because she was a bad person, but it was not the right fit. It was not who I. And look, we're human beings. We make a lot of how many decisions do we make in a day that end up being wrong? You know, like, but for some reason, we're expected for that one. Who we marry is always going to be right. You know, you're supposed to stick with it for thick or thin. And it can't be the right thing to do. I don't think you should throw the towel in for nothing. But I also don't think miserable parents make for good kids. So I made a very tough decision to leave my first marriage. And it's the greatest thing I ever did for my children. I'll say that it is the single greatest thing. Well, why is that? It's a few things. And it has to do with, well, meeting the right person and now being together for 10 years, twice as long as my first wife and I were together. And so Nicole and I brought 2 2-year-olds and a 4-year-old together. We didn't have the roadmap, but we were both successful people. We both understood and had equal moral compass and plane, you know, and beliefs, core beliefs, more so than my first wife and I think did. And I'd say lest it was like, well, one was a Christian, one was a Satanist. It was like, I left the book of Satan behind and came to, no, it was not that dramatic of a change. But I think fundamentally in our drive, our approach to life and other things, there was a lot of other things in alignment. And so we didn't have the rule book, but I think we did a couple of things right. We set up clear structure. Mm-hmm. Like, we created calendars that stayed the same. We didn't venture from that. We created, and children like structure no matter what you do. They love it. Do. They will thrive in it. They will indirectly ask for it once they have it. My 8-year-old's like a perfect example. Like, if we get like one chapter off of the nightly routine or the weekly routine, he's like his mother. My wife is a principal at a middle school and dies by, you know, process, procedure, and everything like that. Very structured, type A. And my 8-year-old's that way. If we get one off the playbook. Dad, you know, I'm supposed to be brushing my teeth right now. It's 8:05. I need to be in the bed with you singing by 8:14.
With you singing?
Oh yeah, I still sing.
All right.
Oh yeah, for my son before he goes to bed. It's our routine. But look, we set up. You know, when we first brought them together, we didn't know the right way to do things. We were good people. We provided good, I think, examples, and I'll get to more about that. But we did something right. We set up really clear structures with our exes, and look, we were blessed to avoid the ex drama. I can't imagine. I've seen it. The toll that takes when you deal or don't have like clear divides. Like, we both had clear divorces done. It was purely a matter. We had the exact custody situations worked out, but my wife, being as structured is, worked with my ex-wife and her ex-husband. We set up clear, exact structures for when everything kind of took place. And certainly you have to allow for flexibility and things like that. But it did create the new normal for our children. And that new normal just became normal, just like today. Because now they're 12, soon to be 12, 12, might as well say 12. They're about to be 12, 12, 14, and 8. And so we've been together 10 years. The 4-year-old and 2-year-olds are now, 14 and 12. And we have a very thriving, good kids, all straight A students for the most part, maybe a B here and there, play multiple sports. But we did set up that I was not ever going to be her son's dad, but that I was a father figure and was going to be around him more than his father was. But I never tried to replace his dad. I just tried to give him structure and an understanding of what my role was within the house. And that, I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to live and breathe it. And I think more than you realize, by giving your kids the example of, wait, okay, my parents get up early, they work out, they're doing these things, we go to practices. Look, I've been at every game my stepson's ever had. I think I've missed one ever. And so that repetition, that structure, that understanding of who I am in the relationship bred more than I could have ever forced upon it. And I think sometimes we think we have to say or do something specific, when more it's the overall structure of the situation that breeds natural behaviors. And I think that's a big key with bringing two blended families together.
I heard a quote not too long ago that the best lessons in life are caught, not taught. And I think what you just did there is just nailed it, right? And the other thing too is providing knowing your place, right? You're not the kid's father. You're not your son's father, and you're not trying to replace him, but you're also trying to show him what good looks like. I also think you nailed it with the fact that our kids really do, or they're keenly aware at our level of happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction, right? Especially within our relationships, right? I've been saying for a long time that our kids have a front row seat to either a fully functional relationship between me and their mom, one that's completely dysfunctional, something in between, right? And they're watching, they're learning. And the thing that's interesting is they can't really necessarily articulate, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm learning. What happens though is it shows up for them later on in life. To double down on what you just said, I didn't have a good father figure growing up. I mean, there were men constantly in and out of my life. But one thing that was constant, I lived 1 mile from my grandfather. My grandfather was an amazing example. And I think he really understood the things that I was up against as a kid. And he really stepped in. He spent a ton of time with me. I was at his house quite a bit, but he was married to my grandmother for 52 years before he passed away. And my grandfather was exactly what you and I were just talking about. He was this great balance of love and compassion, but there were lines you didn't cross, right? And they were very well laid out. The other thing too is I got to see a man love his wife, right? And to respect his wife, how to talk to his wife. Here's the other interesting thing too. I got to see a man who also wouldn't tolerate disrespect from his wife. So and he was never mean about it. So if my grandmother ever got a little fiery, he would just simply say, please don't talk to me like that. Please talk to me with respect. I speak to you with respect. Please do the same with me. Right. And he would draw that line in the sand too, very lovingly, but also wouldn't tolerate it. He wouldn't allow her to walk all over him, which I thought was really fascinating. But I think that that's exactly what kids in general need, is exactly the structure you're laying out. But it's even probably more important for a blended family, because the kids have to know, like, what are the moving pieces here? What is my structure here, right? What is your role? What is my other, my dad's role over here, my mom's role, right? So I think that's gold.
And we never forced to that end. We never first forced the, even though, calling me dad, calling me mom. Like, my wife's name's Nicole, and I have no idea why, but she picked up Miss Cole, like
Miss Cole.
Nicole. But my kids call her Miss Cole to this day, and I'm Mr. Ryan. And so we never tried to be, well, you're going to call her stepmom or mommy or dad. Like, we didn't force any of those kind of things. Like, some of that stuff fell into nature, but we did have the structure of, like, the roles of what they are. And I will say this, back to like loving, that was the one thing, I didn't want my kids to see. And look, it was not like my first wife, like we were berating each other or like whatever, but it was just a lot of unhappiness. But what our kids have seen is that my wife and I do a really good job of, we go to all the practices, we do all the stuff. So a lot of times it's all about the kids, but we also really set a line that we're the parents and that we love each other non-negotiably first and respect one another, my wife and I, and that I put on a platter, and that if the cards got to get thrown down, Nicole's coming first, not at the expense of like something do or die for the children, but they understand that our love and our relationship is on a solid plane, and that I won't tolerate. Our kids are really respectful. We get told this all the time. Yeah, you got good kids. They don't ever do stuff. Like, what do you do? What? I mean, we get that. I mean, literally almost everywhere we go, because our kids don't misbehave when you go to a restaurant. They don't run around acting like crazy people. And I'm like, they know the standard that we set. They know what we expect. We didn't have to tell them 100 times. We needed to tell them like 4 times. We don't do that. And that's all it took. But a lot of parents, I don't think, I see it, they do not set that standard. And it's because they don't either respect themselves or they don't understand how to set boundaries.
I think you just nailed it. They don't know how to set boundaries, right? There are things that we tolerate and the things that we don't. And if we tolerate one thing on Monday and then we don't tolerate it on Tuesday, well, that's not sending a very clear message, or vice versa. My wife and I were just talking about this, because when we tell so I'll give you an example. When we tell our kids to do something, maybe it's a chore, maybe it's clean their room, right? And then they clean it, and then we go in and we inspect it, and we're like, this is not clean. There are still clothes on the floor. Your drawers are still half open. Your bed is a shambles. The sheets haven't been washed. And the laundry, even though it's in your closet in the basket, it's spilling over and overflowing. And the kid's like, well, it looks better than it did before. My wife and I, this was years ago, we were hitting this snag, about exactly that. And we finally just looked at each other, and I think it was me, and I said, I don't think they clearly understand what a clean room, what the expectations are. Like, they have their definition of it. And we see this in our businesses all the time, right? They have their definition of it and we have our definition of it. And neither one of those are communicated what they are. So I'll never forget, one day we helped our kids clean their room. We're like, this is how you clean a room. And then we took a photo of it. And we're like, when we say clean the room, this is a clean room and not anything in between, right? But it's really, and here's the interesting thing that might sound hardcore, but it's so much less work and so much less emotional and mental work as well. Because when I say go clean your room, well, the kid clearly understands, what does a clean room entail? There is no guesswork, right? And my expectation is, well, he now knows what the expectation is and what a clean room looks like. And I think that there isn't really that structure. And sometimes it's that structure and sometimes it's not, but I think that's what gets lost in translation a lot.
100%. And I think it's also, there's the boundary side of, there's no perfect roadmap to this, but there's some stuff that you just got to let go and not worry about, like as part of the structure. Like there needs to be non-negotiables, and there needs to be things that, okay, this doesn't need to be, on the Mount Rushmore priorities, like of whatever that might be. And it's not because it needs to be loose. I'm not suggesting structure on one side and loose on the other. But I think, at certain times Nicole and I will have a conversation like, is this a big deal or not a big deal? Do we need to make, and I'm not here to tell you which one of those things. We could have a whole episode on, 100 different things that we do as parents. I think, but, core schedule, core expectation around tasks or duties. Yeah. There needs to be just clarity, expectations clear. And there's other things like, we're not going to like, if we go to bed at 8:30 one night and 8:40 the next, like we're not drill sergeants. Like it's like you don't have to be a drill sergeant. It's not a big deal, but it doesn't need to be 9:40 if it's supposed to be 8:30. And like there's just there's just core things. And then kids are smart, man. If you don't have to set up like the drill sergeant playbook, they can get clarity from how you treat and talk to one another and how you set the expectation for what's allowed and what's not allowed. And, I'm a firm believer, you can't tell people, do what I say, but not what I do. If I'm putting it out there, unless it's just, I'm having a beer. Okay. Can't have a beer. Sorry, you're 6. But we're not, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. But I mean, I'm talking about like, just general behaviors. Like, okay, it's just funny. I work out a lot. I go to the gym a lot. I prioritize my health. Lo and behold, my 14-year-old suddenly working out every day. Go figure.
Right.
I mean, and I didn't even I've never gone, hey man, you need to get with it. You need to start working out. Hey, I expect you when you come home from school, you're working out. No, the kid just started doing push-ups before he went to bed. Now he does 300 push-ups before he goes to bed every night. I told him to do that. But he's watched and had an example. And so it's just funny. Kids are smarter and adaptive, but they do learn from what we do.
All right. So you're talking about the gym, and I love this particular analogy. I mean, fitness has been a part of my life for 30 years. I've always worked out. So has my wife. We used to do, with the older two, we used to do what's called fun family garage workouts, right? Where we grab like our kettlebells and do the push-ups and all this other stuff. I mean, and we would our main goal was during family workouts is have fun. I really don't care. Like, as long as you are moving and you're finding enjoyment in your exercise, that is the launching pad for a kid who's going to be excited to go take care of his fitness. And I'm the exact same way. Part of the reason my oldest son wrestles is because he's like, I want to do something different for fitness besides go to the gym, because he goes to the gym all the time. My 16-year-old loves the gym. I actually have this photo of him. He went to the gym on Christmas Day, actually Christmas night. He's like, we're done with presents, right? I'm like, yeah. He's like, all right, well, I'm going to go work chest and tries with Clark. And I'm like, dude, it's Christmas. He's like, well, yeah. He's like, but still workout day. And there's nothing else really going on today. And can I go to the gym? And I'm like, I'm sitting here thinking like, I can't believe this. Right. But yeah, you're exactly right. If we are that role model, and we don't have to be a drill sergeant, we can actually show and showcase the enjoyment and the good things that come out of it, versus like, you got to go do this thing, because they're probably going to be more resistant to that. But I love that example, man. And I'm already scared of your son who can do 300 push-ups. Like, the guy is going to look like a specimen in his high school years. It's crazy, man.
Yeah, he's an actor, man. He got a pull-up bar. We got him that for Christmas. So we're now encouraging things because he took a natural response to it. We got him a curl bar, a punching bag, and like all that stuff. And it's funny. His there
you go, man.
He's gonna hit the growth spurt here any day now and then scare some people.
Sounds scary already.
I know, but I will say, the physical fitness thing. If you're a dad, like, you got to make time to take care of yourself. You have to be right physically and the only way to be right mentally is to be right physically. And I'm not saying you need to have a six pack, but if you got the dad bod and you're unhealthy and you feel unhealthy, it's hard to be a good dad. I'm just going to tell you. You know, I'm blessed with a gene. I don't know what's in the Alford family or what. My dad ran 5 miles a day. My sister works out like an animal. My mom's very physically fit. It's in our blood. I don't know how or why, but it is. Like, I'm just wired that way. So, like, don't get me wrong. I have moments of, you know, eating better, not eating better, which affects like maybe my weight and things like that. I don't always have the perfect physique, but I'm always in pretty good shape. And I just can't even fathom, you know, trying to be a good dad, a good husband, you know, without some level of taking care of myself physically, which then releases a lot of things mentally. So I can't encourage a dad that might be listening to get that in order.
I think mentally and emotionally. So I'm the same way. Actually, I have a degree in sports medicine with a minor in nutrition. I was never really meant to do this. I was going to go into corporate wellness back in my younger years, or I was going to go get my master's in physical therapy, which at the time the industry was completely swamped and there wasn't a job to be had. So I moved on. But my kids will ask me, like, early on, they would be like, why do you work out so much? I'm like, actually, I was like, I work the demons out. And they're like, what does that mean? I was like, it's awesome. You know, taking excess energy, which, by the way, everybody has, whether that shows up as stress or whether that shows up at whatever, it's there. And being able to, I think of working out as recharging your battery. Like, literally, you plug your phone in every night to recharge the battery. Well, you go into the gym, your body's made to move. You know, your mind is made for your body to move. And when we do that, all, you know, dopamine gets hit, endorphins get released, a lot of really good things. I think some of the best ideas in business have come like in the middle of a workout. You know, it's because the mind is free and you feel really good. There's something to be said about that. I do agree with you. You don't need a six pack to be a great father, but just kind of a quick comparison, right? Like I said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I got injured in August during a workout with my oldest son. Just radically messed up my knee. And my knee bled internally for 12 straight weeks. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And finally, after 12 weeks, I had to have the knee drained several times. Blood was always there. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like Googling things on the internet. Like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my leg.
Oh.
None of that happened. But 30 years of fitness. And then suddenly I could only operate at about the 30% level that I was before. Couldn't do any cardio. Couldn't train legs. I basically was going in, working upper body as much as I could, but it really took a toll on my mental and emotional health because I didn't have that outlet. And I realized how important that outlet really is for us as men and husbands and fathers. And now I'm pretty much healed. I had to get surgery to get it taken care of. It's all good now. But not having that, I was showing up as like a 1.0 version of myself. And I knew it. I didn't have the tolerance. I didn't have patience. I just didn't feel right. It just not having just that release was critical. And I've learned how critical it is. And I'm like, man, now that I can do it again, I'm doubling down, training every day again. But yeah, it's hard to do it without, and I stress this outlet, this positive outlet, because I think every guy has an outlet. It's just a determination of, is this outlet healthy or is it a detriment? Right. And there's a lot of outlets out there
on the other side.
Yeah,
for sure.
As we wrap up here, I want to really hit on this notion of balance. When I first got involved in the dad space, it was work-life balance. And then doing this journey for as long as I have, you know, and I know there is no such thing as balance, but there can be optimization and there can be effectiveness and there can be efficiency. You run 5 businesses. You have 4 boys. You're married to Miss Nicole or Miss Cole. And, you know, it's kind of funny. We have a babysitter named Nicole, and my youngest, I couldn't say Nicole. He called her My Cole. So we all call her My Cole. So it's kind of funny how it's somewhat similar. But how do you run 5 businesses? You integrate yourself in there. How do you keep that level of connection with Nicole? You've got 4 boys. How do you do it all?
Look, it's not easy. Let me say that first and foremost. I will say this. I ran really hard really long early. It had a lot to do with probably my first marriage not working, along with just compatibility. I worked in Manhattan, worked in Madison Avenue, some of the largest companies in the world, ad agency in the marketing business, working on campaigns that you would all know and probably watched on TV. And I fried myself on some level, but I realized that money isn't everything, but it's important. And so I did have some learning lessons coming into my second marriage that kind of adapt me. So I have 5 companies, but I put a really strong line in the sand, non-negotiables. And if you do that with yourself, with your employees, and even with your clients, they'll respect you for it. They understand it. So first and foremost, my family comes first. And no matter what's going on, if it's an emergency with the family or a game or a practice or whatever, I'm going to be there. And I set that expectation both with myself and with everyone else. And I also, you have to extract joy from those situations. And a lot of times, if you're unhappy with yourself or unhappy in your marriage or something like that, it strips the joy out of some of those things, which then creates excuses because you aren't truly wanting to be there. And so you got to get that right first. You got to get your marriage right. You got to get your family right. And you got to be happy in that organization or unit, like as a family. So you got to start there. But once that's right, then you have to set expectations both internally and externally. And look, I don't care who you are, what you do. Show me one boss, one client, one person that's going to tell you when you go, I've got to go to my son's practice. It's going to take an hour and a half. I'll get back to you at 7:30 or the next day or whatever. Show me one client or one person in 2024 that's going to fault you or tell you can't do that. They're not.
They're not.
You're making it up in your head if you think it is. We do what we want to do. We make the choices that we want to make. We create the balance that we want to make. If you don't have work-life balance, it's because you aren't happy at home and you want to be at work more. Period. End of story. And so if you truly want it, then you got to get happy with yourself and then get happy with your wife and their kids. If you aren't happy with your kids, you got problems anyway. But let me just say, that's a whole other, couch subject, in my office, like laying down on the brown couch, we got to talk through some issues, but it starts with happiness with your wife and that balance there. And as long as that is there, because that's really the only time I haven't wanted, when I haven't had work-life balance, it's when the relationship with my wife was not right. And that's happened with Nicole on some levels, nothing like it did with my ex. But the truth of the matter is, we make the time for what we want to do as men, and you can have it all. You can, but you've got to prioritize, and you do have to set boundaries.
I agree. You can have it all. It's one thing that we say. We actually have a mastermind just for business owners. We have one for 9-to-5ers called the Alliance, and we have one for business owners called the Boardroom. We say that all the time. You can have it all if you understand how it works, right? And I think men go about this the opposite way. I know I did for a long time, which is I need to make everybody else happy first. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some nobility in that, right? Yeah. There's some selflessness in that, but it's also a trap. It's also a trap because what happens is if we run full bore in trying to make everybody else happy, your wife, your kids, your team, your business, whatever, and all the while you aren't putting gas in your own car, well, that's going to be a problem. Your car is going to run out of gas. We don't expect our cars to run without fuel, but yet somehow, some way, we expect us to do that. And that's a no-end situation. The other thing too is once we're in that trap, I think it's actually really hard for us to see what's actually going on. Because when we're in that trap and we're trying to make everybody else happy and we're trying to serve without taking just a little bit of time. I'm not talking about taking a lot of time, but a little bit of time to fill us up in whatever means that is for you. Fitness is probably one big thing for you as it is for me. But if we're not doing that, we're actually showing up as the overwhelmed, stressed out, burnt out version of ourselves, which by the way, your kids really don't want that version of you and neither does your wife. but yet we're so far down the rabbit hole and in that trap that we just can't see it. But as soon as we just step back, and sometimes, man, it just takes like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, go do something so you are your best. I don't know about you, but I do love to work out in the morning, but there's certain things that I do before I leave this office, before I go hang out with my kids. If I do them, I'm going to be better. So if I go like full bore in here and do like some burpees, or I do like train abs, or I do some push-ups or something to release, that energy, I feel like I can tackle the world with my kids and my wife, but I think a lot of guys don't create that space, which I think it could be a huge miss.
I think it is. But I'll say this on the other side of that coin. So 10 years ago, I used to be a 5 handicap golfer. I played golf once a week and, was a pretty good golfer. I remember the country club. When my second wife and I got married, we were still members of the country club for the first few years. But I made this determination. We say you can have it all. You can have it all. But you know what? I realized that spending 6 hours on the golf course on
right.
every weekend, or every other weekend, or three times a month on a Saturday or Sunday was not conducive to a healthy family relationship.
100%.
I have not played golf in 3 years. I only play now when I get invited with family or friends, or like there's just something that makes sense, a tournament or something, and I can still hit it around decently. But I gave it up because do I love golf? I love golf. It's a blast. Is it fun? Yeah, I love it. But it just wasn't conducive to, look, the kids got stuff like it takes 6 hours to play golf. And I don't like to play 9 holes, because even 9 holes, by the time you pack up and do everything, it's still a 3.5 hour venture. And so I made the decision that may have made me happy, but it did absolutely nothing, because none of my kids really got into it. They for whatever reason, I showed them, took them, we played all that. None of them really took to it. It didn't make my wife happy. She didn't care about golf. And look, she didn't make me do that, by the way. Yeah. I just realized, the second time around, I really love my wife. I really love my kids. I want, I love myself and want myself to be happy. And so I do other things. I do the physical fitness thing, but that wasn't conducive. And so again, you still have to make some hard decisions and then decide some things and draw some lines in the sand for what works and what doesn't.
I'm so glad you said that. It all, what are the things that are going to be most effective that I can do that aren't going to completely rob me of my time? I feel you on this one. I did martial arts for many years of my life, and it was on my bucket list to be a black belt in this one martial art that took about 5 years to get the black belt. And my instructor at the time, so I was doing Kukso-wan, which is it's a traditional Korean mixed martial art of Taekwondo and Hapkido. They blend them together. And so I did that for years, and then I started having kids. But my instructor was a diehard. He's like 3 times a week, an hour and a half per class. So he would run 1.5 hour classes. You had to be there 3 times a week. That's not really conducive to, a young family. It was like, it's basically like 5.5 hours of time, almost the exact same thing. And it just got up to the point where he was taking so much time that I was 1 test away from my black belt. And I had a conversation, and they only tested for black belt once a year, which was brutal. I went to my instructor. I'm like, listen, man, I know all the curriculum. I'm up for testing. Are you going to test me, in October? And he was like, you haven't averaged 3 classes a week. You've averaged 2. I was like, that's all I can do, man. Like, I can't do more. He's like, well, then you won't be tested. And I'm like, so you're telling me if you don't test me in October until I start to average 3 classes per week for a year, you're not going to test me until the following October? He said, yeah. And I was like, well, unfortunately, I need to leave. And I left. I left that black belt on the table after training for 4.5, 5 years in that martial art. And I left it. It sucked to leave. But what sucked worse was having my wife be a single parent for 6 hours. And it was right in the ideal times of the day. It was in the evenings. It was a Saturday. So it was just like, it wasn't working out. So I totally get that, man.
Yeah. And so we got to make those decisions. I mean,
We do.
And I'll let me throw another one at you, dads and people listening. But golf's good for business, man. You know how many deals I've closed before? Bullshit. Let me just tell you right now, in 2024, you know how many people were playing 6 hours of golf to get business? Very few. It just clients don't have time for that. They're not going to do it. I told and convinced myself forever that mattered, and I didn't close one deal on the golf course. And look, I worked a job that probably could or should have closed deals on the golf course. So keep fooling yourself.
That's hilarious, man. Well, listen, Ryan, where can guys find you, connect with you? You're doing a lot of amazing things. I know you run a marketing agency. You really know branding really well. We got a lot of guys who own businesses. Where can men best connect with you?
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram at Ryan Alford. Had that blue check before you could buy it.
They had the blue check. You should somehow make that a part of your bio or something like that.
Before you get, I say it on the podcast a lot. Yeah, no, our podcast is pretty popular too, the Radcast. So either one of those, you can find me. And but happy to talk, and I answer most of my DMs. I get about 1,000 a week, but I like just from the show and different things, but I do answer all the ones that are legitimate. So I'm very accessible, and I would love to connect with anybody that listens and this resonates with them.
Well, not to worry, guys. We're going to have all the links in the show notes for you. All you have to do is head on over to thedadedge.com/Friday144 for this show. Again, thedadedge.com/Friday144 for this show. We'll have Ryan's website. We'll also have his Instagram in there, so you can get connected there. Ryan, this has been awesome, man. It's not very often that I get to speak with another man who has 4 boys as well. But we're a rare breed, my friend. But thanks for giving your time today. This was a ton of fun.
My pleasure, Larry. Thanks for having me on.
You bet, brother.